When people think of ghost stories in Atlantic Canada, they usually think of phantom pirate ships or standard lighthouse hauntings. But if you talk to the old fishermen around the Halifax harbor in Nova Scotia, they speak of something far more malicious. They speak of Gibbet Hill. In the late 1700s and early 1800s, the British Royal Navy used these islands in the harbor, specifically McNabs Island, for a brutal form of psychological warfare and criminal deterrence known as gibbeting. When sailors mutinied or committed piracy, they weren't just executed. Their corpses were locked into iron cages, called gibbets, and hoisted high on wooden gallows overlooking the water. They were left there for months, rotting in the salt air, picked apart by crows, serving as a gruesome warning to every ship entering Canada. But historical records from the Nova Scotia archives had a stranger detail. In the winter of 1782, a crew of mutineers from a British military vessel were gibbeted on the hill. According to the logbooks of the local watchmen, the iron cages didn't stay still. Even on windless nights, the cages would swing violently. Worse, the watchmen began reporting that the skeletal remains inside the cages were changing. Bones were being added. The rib cages were expanding, growing too large for the iron frames. Local Mac lore had long warned of coastal fog around these islands, speaking of the Kulo, or the drowned men, amorphous, fluid entities that crawl out of the freezing Atlantic to inhabit the hollow spaces left by the dead. Today, Gibbet Hill is a lonely, overground mound, officially off limits after dark. Our story tonight follows a solo ocean kayaker who is a subscriber and who decided to camp on the shoreline of McNabs Island, entirely unaware of what the tide brings in when the fog rolls over the harbor. The Atlantic Ocean doesn't sound like a river or a lake. It sounds like an engine. It's a rhythmic, heavy grinding of water against black granite. And when the fog rolls into the Halifax harbor, it swallows the light so completely that you can't tell where the ocean ends and the sky begins. From this point on, I'll speak from the point of view of the writer. My name is Sean. I run a channel dedicated to extreme solo kayaking and overnight coastal survival. I've camped on isolated beaches all over the Maritimes, but I wanted something with history. I chose McNabs Island. It sits right at the mouth of the harbor, abandoned, covered in military ruins, old foundations, and a dense, choking thicket of spruce trees. I dragged my fiberglass kayak onto the rocky shore of Mogger Beach, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving nothing but a sickly purple bruise in the western sky. The air temperature dropped instantly, the damp Atlantic cold drilling straight into my bones. "Alright guys, we're holed up," I said to the camera, flipping on my ring light. The lens flared against the heavy mist. Behind me is a tree line leading up to Gibbet Hill. For those who don't know the history, this is where the British military used to leave bodies of executed pirates to rot in iron cages. Tonight, we're camping right beneath it. I set up my minimalist baby sack on the gravel bar, built a small driftwood fire, and started cooking dinner. But the ocean wasn't behaving normally. The waves weren't crashing, they were sliding. The water was oily, black, and completely flat, lapping against the shore with a wet, sucking sound. And the smell was unbearable. It didn't smell like salt and seaweed. It smelled like low tide mixed with rancid pork, tallow, the smell of decaying animal fat. Creak. I froze. the metal fork halfway to my mouth. The sound came from the woods on the hill behind me. It was a high-pitched, metallic screech, the sound of rusted iron rubbing against rusted iron. Must be an old military gate, I muttered to the camera, trying to sound casual for the viewers, but my chest felt tight. There are no gates on Gibbet Hill, just trees and historical plaques. Creak, clink. It was closer this time, and it was rhythmic. It sounded exactly like a heavy cage swinging from a rope hitting a wooden post. I picked up my camera, mounting it on my head strap, and grabbed my heavy-duty diving flashlight. "We're going to go and check it out," I whispered. "If it's a prank, someone went to a lot of trouble to drag iron out here." The trek up Gibbet Hill was a nightmare of tangled brush and slippery wet moss. The fog had become so dense it felt more like walking through a wet wool blanket. My flashlight beam couldn't penetrate it. The light just bounced back into my eyes, creating a blinding white wall. The swinging sound grew louder with every step. Creak, clang. Creak, clang. I burst into a small clearing at the summit of the hill. In the center stood a reconstruction of historical gallows, a massive horizontal wooden beam supported by two thick pillars. Hanging from the center of the beam by a thick rusted chain was a cage. It was a gibbet, a human-shaped iron frame designed to hold a corpse upright so it couldn't fall apart as it decomposed. The iron was pitted with centuries of rust, dripping with the heavy moisture of the fog. The cage was swinging violently back and forth, but there was no wind. The air was dead, suffocatingly still. "What the hell?" I whispered, stepping closer, holding the camera steady. I shone the beam directly into the cage. It was empty, but as I watched, the swinging began to slow down. It didn't stop naturally. It stopped as if someone had placed a heavy hand on the bottom of the iron frame to steady it. Then I noticed the bottom of the cage. The rusted iron bars were caked in a thick white glistening paste. It looked like lard mixed with coarse gray hair and fragments of yellowed, brittle bone. Squitch. The sound came from the grass directly beneath the cage. I dropped the flashlight beam to the ground. There were no footprints. Instead, there was a wide, wet trail through the high grass. A trail of the same white, greasy sludge leading out of the clearing and down the opposite side of the hill toward the dark interior of the island. Suddenly, my head cam battery indicator flashed red. It went from 100% to 5% in a single second. The ring light flickered and died, plunging the clearing into near total darkness. From the dark woods, where the wet trail led, a sound began. It wasn't a voice. It was a wet, rattling wheeze. It sounded like a pair of lungs completely filled with water, forcing air through a layer of fluid. Gurgle, gurgle. And then a shape began to rise from the brush. It didn't stand up like a human. It poured itself upward. In the dim ambient light of the distant city across the harbor, I saw a silhouette that made my throat lock up. It was easily 7 feet tall, but its proportions were entirely wrong. Its torso was impossibly wide, like a bloated barrel, but its limbs were thin, twisting like wet ropes. Its skin was translucent, a pale sickly gray that seemed to shimmer with a coating of grease. It had no face, just a smooth, wet dome of flesh. But across the center of that dome, a jagged horizontal tear opened up, exposing rows of black needle-thin teeth. The thing exhaled. A cloud of freezing, foul-smelling vapor shot from its mouth, hitting me square in the face. The stench of rotting tallow was so overwhelming, I dropped to my knees, dry heaving into the moss. The creature took a step forward. Squitch. It didn't have feet. Its lower limbs ended in raw, tattered stumps of exposed muscle and bone. Yet it moved with a horrifying, fluid speed. I scrambled backward on my hands and knees, tearing through thorns, ignoring the pain as branches sliced my face. I ran down the hill, abandoning the trail, simply throwing myself down the steep slope toward the beach. Behind me, I could hear it coming. It didn't crash through the brush like a heavy animal. It slid. It sounded like a massive wet tarp being dragged over the rocks at high speed. Shriek, shriek. I burst out of the gravel beach. My campfire was dead, not burned out, but completely smothered by a thick mound of the same white, greasy sludge. My kayak was 20 feet away. I sprinted to it, grabbing the toggle line of the bow, and began pulling it to the surf. The water was freezing, shocking my calves, but I didn't care. I needed to get off the island. I needed to stay. I needed the safety of the open ocean. I climbed into the cockpit, shoved off the rocks, and began paddling with a manic, desperate strength. My shoulder muscles burned, my breath coming in ragged screams. I looked back at the shore. The creature was standing at the water's edge. It didn't follow me into the surf. It just stood there, its pale, faceless head tilting from side to side. Then it lifted its thin, ropey arms and began to tear at its own chest. With a sickening rip, it peeled open its own pale skin. Inside its bloated torso, there was no blood, no organs. There was only a hollow cavernous space lined with rusted iron bars. The entity hadn't just come from the hill. It was the hill. It was a manifestation of every horror, every agonizing death, and every erotic corpse that had ever hung in those cages. It let out a high-pitched metallic shriek, the exact sound of the rusted iron chains, and then it dissolved, collapsing into a puddle of black, oily water that was instantly swallowed by the tide. I thought I was safe. I was 100 yards offshore, the dark water of the Halifax harbor beneath my hull. The lights of the city skyline were visible in the distance, a beacon of civilization just a 20-minute paddle away. Then the fog rolled over the water. It didn't descend from the sky. It rose from the ocean itself. Within 30 seconds, the city lights were wiped out. The shore of McNabs Island disappeared. I was trapped in a featureless white void, floating on a sea that had gone completely, terrifyingly silent. The current changed. My kayak began to spin. No matter how hard I paddled against it, the water was pulling me in a circle. A slow, massive whirlpool was forming in the center of the harbor mouth. Thump. Something hit the bottom of my kayak. The fiberglass hull vibrated against my seat. "Get away!" I screamed, slamming my paddle into the water. Thump. Thump. It was on both sides now. Long, pale, fluid fingers breached the surface of the water, wrapping around the perimeter lines of my kayak. The fingers didn't have nails or skin. They looked like they were made of melted fat, freezing solid the moment they exposed themselves to the air. The kayak began to tilt. The water beside me bubbled, and the faceless dome of the creature rose from the black tide, just inches from my face. The horizontal maw split open, and this time, it spoke. It didn't use a human voice. It used the sound of grinding stones, the groaning of ship timbers, and the agonizing collective weeping of men dying of scurvy and exposure. "The cage is empty." The sound vibrated through the hull of my boat. "We need the bones." The creature lunged, its ropey arms wrapping around my life jacket. It hauled me out of the cockpit, I plunged into the freezing Atlantic Ocean. The cold was an instant paralysis. My heavy winter gear filled with water, dragging me down into the black abyss. I thrashed wildly, but the creature was beneath me, its hollow open chest pressed against my back. I could feel the rusted irons of its interior scraping against my ribs. It was trying to pull me inside of itself. It was trying to use my body to fill the void of the gibbet. My lungs filled with burning salt water. My vision began to fade into a cold, dark gray. I woke up on the shore of the Eastern Passage, on the mainland side of the harbor. The sun was high in the sky, a bright, blinding Nova Scotian morning. A pair of local dog walkers had found me dragged up on the rocks, unconscious, my kayak floating miles away, near the shipping lanes. The doctors at the Halifax infirmary told me it was a miracle. They said I had suffered severe hypothermia and near drowning, but my vitals were stable. They assumed I had capsized in the heavy fog and been carried across the harbor by the tide. I didn't tell them about the hill. I didn't tell them about the cage. But they couldn't explain one thing. When they cut off my wetsuit in the emergency room, they found a pattern of deep, dark purple bruising wrapping entirely around my torso. The bruises weren't random. They were perfectly straight, geometric lines spaced 3 inches apart, encircling my chest and spine. They looked exactly like the imprint of an iron cage. It's been 3 weeks since that night. I haven't gone back to the water. I sold my gear. But the terror didn't stay on McNabs Island. Every time I take a breath, my chest feels heavier. My ribs feel stiff, brittle, as if they are turning into something hard and yielding. And last night, I woke up in the dark, the room freezing cold, smelling heavily of rancid pork and low tide. I walked to the bathroom mirror and turned on the light. I pulled up my shirt. The bruises are gone. In their place, my skin has gone pale, translucent, gray. And when I pressed my fingers against my chest, I didn't feel muscle or fat. I felt the unmistakable cold, rigid surface of rusted iron growing out from beneath my skin. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. Just a high-pitched metallic screech of a rusted chain swinging in the wind.